When the cameras stopped rolling and the spotlights dimmed, Michael Jackson transformed into an entirely different person. The names closest to the world-famous star reveal his face that no one has ever seen before. If these kinds of stories catch your attention, don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. Where are you watching us from right now? Let us know in the comments below. August 29, 1958, to June 25, 2009. Those dates bookend the life of Michael Joseph Jackson, known to the world as the King of Pop, the musical genius who revolutionized entertainment and sold hundreds of millions of records. For 5 decades, he lived under the unrelenting glare of public scrutiny, performing, dancing, breaking records, making headlines, and ultimately, becoming perhaps the most famous human being on the planet. But who was Michael Jackson when the world wasn't watching? The question seems almost nonsensical. After all, when was the world not watching Michael Jackson? From his childhood performances with the Jackson 5 to his final days preparing for the "This Is It" tour, cameras documented his every public move. Paparazzi hounded him relentlessly. Fans mobbed him wherever he went. For most of his life, privacy was a luxury Michael Jackson rarely experienced. Yet paradoxically, despite this constant exposure, few people truly knew the man behind the sequined gloves and surgical masks. The public Michael, the electrifying performer, the musical innovator, the eccentric celebrity, was a carefully crafted persona that often bore little resemblance to the private individual his closest associates encountered behind closed doors. There were 2 Michael Jacksons, explains Bill Whitfield, who served as Jackson's personal security guard during the last 2.5 years of his life and co-authored the book, Remember the Time, Protecting Michael Jackson in His Final Days. There was the iconic superstar that the world knew, and then there was this other guy, just a man, a father, a boss, who very few people ever really got to see. This duality wasn't merely the normal distinction between a performer's stage presence and off-duty personality. In Jackson's case, the difference was so profound that those who knew him intimately often described feeling like they were in the presence of 2 entirely different people. On stage, he was a god, recalls choreographer Vincent Patterson, who worked extensively with Jackson on his tours and short films. The transformation was incredible. This shy, soft-spoken, almost fragile person would suddenly become this force of nature, confident, commanding, mesmerizing. Then the performance would end, and within minutes, he'd retreat back into himself, speaking just above a whisper, avoiding eye contact. This stark contrast between public and private personas began early in Jackson's life. Thrust into the spotlight as a child performer, young Michael learned to compartmentalize, to create a boundary between the confident showman who dazzled audiences and the sensitive boy who craved normalcy and stability. Frank Cascio, who became friends with Jackson as a child and later worked as his personal assistant, describes this split in his memoir, My Friend Michael. The Michael I knew was not the Michael the world knew. The Michael I knew was a regular guy who happened to be the best entertainer in the world, but who just wanted to live a normal life, which was pretty much impossible. So what was the private Michael Jackson really like? The accounts from those who knew him paint a picture far more complex and contradictory than his public image suggested. For starters, the man known for his flamboyant stage costumes and distinctive fashion sense was often remarkably casual in private. Karen Fay, Jackson's longtime makeup artist and friend for over 27 years, recalls. When he wasn't performing or making a public appearance, Michael usually wore very simple clothes, jeans, t-shirts, comfortable shoes. He saved the elaborate outfits for when he was on duty as Michael Jackson the performer. This simplicity extended to his food preferences as well. Despite his vast wealth, Jackson's culinary tastes were surprisingly basic. His personal chef, Kai Chase, has shared that his favorite foods included Mexican cuisine, fried chicken, fruit smoothies, and the decidedly ordinary combination of grilled cheese sandwiches with tomato soup. He wasn't into fancy gourmet meals, Chase said in an interview following Jackson's death. He preferred comfort food and home cooking. And he had a major sweet tooth. He loved candy and desserts, especially apple cobbler. Those close to Jackson often noted his surprising sweet tooth. According to his security team, he would sometimes send them on late-night runs for candy and ice cream. Bodyguard Mike Garcia recalled, he loved Snickers bars and hot tamales candy. Sometimes at 2 or 3 in the morning, he'd ask us to go find him some sweets. It was like a kid with a craving, but it showed his human side. His relationship with food was complicated, however. While he enjoyed these comfort foods, he was also known to skip meals when deeply involved in creative projects. Longtime friend and collaborator Quincy Jones once mentioned, Michael could go a whole day without eating when he was in the zone. We'd be in the studio for 12 hours, and I'd realize he hadn't taken a single break for food. Perhaps most surprising to those who knew only his public persona was Jackson's intellect and curiosity about the world. Far from the eccentric man-child portrayed in the media, the private Michael was a voracious reader with a sharp mind and wide-ranging interests. Michael had an extensive library, remembers Harrison Funk, his personal photographer for many years. Thousands of books on art, history, philosophy, religion, science. He read constantly and could discuss just about any topic with remarkable insight. Lisa Marie Presley, who was briefly married to Jackson in the mid-1990s, echoed this assessment in interviews following their divorce. Despite the negative publicity surrounding their relationship, Presley consistently described Jackson as highly intelligent and well-read. He was one of the smartest people I've ever met. He read everything. We would have these incredible conversations about history or art that would go on for hours. This intellectual side manifested in his approach to his art as well. While the effortless grace of his performances might have suggested a natural, intuitive talent, those who worked with him in the studio described a meticulous craftsman who left nothing to chance. Brad Buxer, Jackson's musical director for many years, recalls the painstaking attention to detail that characterized their recording sessions. Michael knew exactly what he wanted. He could hear every instrument, every note, every nuance in a complex arrangement. He might spend hours on a single vocal phrase, trying it different ways until it was perfect. His work ethic was unbelievable. This perfectionism was legendary among his collaborators. Bruce Swedian, the engineer who worked on many of Jackson's biggest hits, including the entirety of the Thriller album, described Michael's approach. He would push himself harder than anyone I've ever seen. We might do 50, 60, 70 takes of a vocal, not because it wasn't good, but because Michael believed it could always be better. The contrast between the public perception of Jackson as a performer who relied on production and auto-tune, which wasn't even used in most of his career, versus the reality of his meticulous musicianship was striking. Producer Teddy Riley, who worked with Jackson on the Dangerous album, has said, Michael understood music on a level that many trained musicians don't. He could beatbox every drum pattern, vocalize every string arrangement. He didn't read music in the traditional sense, but he spoke it fluently. The depth of Jackson's musical knowledge extended far beyond pop. Those close to him noted his appreciation for classical composers like Debussy and Tchaikovsky, jazz innovators like Miles Davis and John Coltrane, and rock pioneers like the Beatles and the Doors. This broad musical palette informed his own compositions, which often incorporated elements from multiple genres. He would reference the most obscure songs or artists in our sessions, recalled producer Jimmy Jam. Once he made me listen to a Gregorian chant from the Middle Ages because he wanted to incorporate a similar vocal texture into a track we were working on. His knowledge was encyclopedic. But perhaps the most significant aspect of the private Michael Jackson, and the one that contrasted most sharply with certain elements of his public image in later years, was his role as a father. After the birth of his first child, Michael Joseph Jackson Jr., known as Prince, in 1997, followed by daughter Paris in 1998 and son Prince Michael II, known as Blanket, now BG, in 2002, Jackson's life took on new meaning. Those close to him during this period describe a devoted, hands-on father whose children became the center of his universe. Nanny Grace Ruaramba, who helped care for the children for many years, has said, Michael did everything for those kids. He read to them every night, helped them with their homework, taught them to play music and appreciate art. He was protective, yes, but also very nurturing and involved in every aspect of their lives. Unlike his own childhood experience with education, which was fragmented due to touring and performing, Jackson was adamant that his children receive a proper education. He hired tutors and created a schoolroom at Neverland Ranch, complete with desks, books, and a regular schedule. According to those who witnessed this setup, Jackson was actively involved in monitoring their progress, reviewing their work, and encouraging their intellectual curiosity. He wanted them to be well-rounded, knowledgeable people, explained one former tutor who worked with the children. He emphasized literature, history, science, but also made sure they had art, music, and physical education. It was much more structured than people realize. The controversial decision to have his children wear masks in public, often criticized by the media, took on a different meaning when understood from the perspective of those in Jackson's inner circle. The masks weren't about hiding the children's identities from the world because he was eccentric or ashamed of them, as some people claimed, explains bodyguard Bill Whitfield. They were about protecting their privacy and giving them the normal childhood he never had. He wanted them to be able to go to a movie or a theme park without being recognized, photographed, or hounded. Behind closed doors, there were no masks, just a loving father with his kids. This dedication to fatherhood revealed a profound tenderness in Jackson that few outside his inner circle ever witnessed. Makeup artist Karen Fay recalls, "The way Michael lit up around his children was beautiful to see. He was gentle, patient, playful, a completely different person from the guarded, sometimes anxious man he could be in other settings." Dr. Tome Tome, who served as Jackson's manager and advisor in his final years, observed, "When those children entered a room, everything changed. Michael would transform instantly. All the stress, all the business concerns, all the pressure would just fall away, and he would be fully present with them. It was like watching someone come home to themselves." The depth of Jackson's love for his children was perhaps best articulated by his daughter Paris in her first interview after his death, when she told Oprah Winfrey, "He was the best father you could ever imagine." What many don't realize is that despite his fame and wealth, Jackson strove to instill humility and social responsibility in his children. According to multiple sources, he regularly took them to homeless shelters and hospitals, not for publicity. These visits were private, but to teach them about privilege and compassion. He wanted them to understand how fortunate they were, explains one former assistant. He would have them bring toys or books to children in hospitals. He was raising them to be givers, not entitled celebrity kids. This sense of social responsibility was a core aspect of Jackson's private personality that often went unrecognized in public narratives. Throughout his career, he donated millions to charitable causes, frequently without seeking publicity or tax benefits. The Guinness Book of World Records recognized him as the pop star who supported the most charities. Michael gave away an astronomical amount of money, confirms attorney John Branca, co-executor of Jackson's estate. Much of it was never publicized because he didn't do it for the recognition. He did it because he genuinely cared. Beyond his role as a father, the private Michael Jackson was characterized by contradictions that made him both fascinating and enigmatic to those who knew him. He was simultaneously childlike and wise beyond his years. He could be incredibly generous yet meticulously careful with his finances. He was deeply spiritual but constantly questioning. He craved connection but was often isolated. He was one of the most famous people on earth yet frequently expressed feeling misunderstood and alone. Michael lived in a kind of emotional paradox, observes Dr. Lois Armstrong, a psychologist who has studied the impact of fame on celebrities but never treated Jackson personally. On one hand, he had this extraordinary gift that connected him to millions of people around the world. On the other hand, that same fame created a barrier that separated him from normal human interaction. Few people in history have experienced that particular kind of isolation. This isolation was both literal and figurative. Physically, Jackson was often sequestered in his homes or hotel suites, separated from the outside world by layers of security. Emotionally, he struggled to form and maintain authentic relationships in a world where many people approached him with hidden agendas or preconceptions. Michael was always looking for genuine connections, recalls Frank Cascio. But it was nearly impossible for him to know who wanted to be his friend because he was Michael Jackson and who wanted to be his friend because of what they could get from him. This uncertainty bred a wariness that some mistook for eccentricity. Jackson developed elaborate methods of testing people's intentions, sometimes using disguises or having associates approach potential new friends first to gauge their reactions. He would send someone to meet you before he would meet you himself, explains film director Brett Ratner, who became friends with Jackson in the 1990s. He wanted to know if you were interested in him as a person or as Michael Jackson, the celebrity. It was his way of protecting himself from users and hangers-on. This caution extended to his business dealings as well. Though often portrayed as financially naive or easily manipulated, those who worked closely with Jackson on business matters describe a shrewd, detail-oriented individual who was highly aware of his worth and rights. Michael knew exactly what his assets were and what they should be generating, explains one former financial advisor who requested anonymity. The narrative that he was oblivious to business matters is simply false. He made some questionable decisions at times, but they were his decisions, not the result of him being duped or manipulated, as many have suggested. Attorney Peter Lopez, who represented Jackson for several years before his own death in 2010, echoed this assessment. Michael was extremely intelligent about his business. He asked insightful questions, read contracts thoroughly, and understood complex financial structures. What he sometimes lacked was not intelligence but trusted advisors who genuinely had his best interests at heart. This pervasive sense of loneliness that shadowed Jackson throughout his adult life. Even surrounded by staff, family, and associates, he often seemed to be searching for a kind of connection that eluded him. Sometimes he would call me in the middle of the night, not because he needed anything, but just to talk, remembers Karen Fay. He would ask about my day, my family, normal things. I think he was hungry for ordinary conversations that weren't about business or his career. This longing for normalcy manifested in unexpected ways. Despite his astronomical wealth, Jackson occasionally engaged in activities that most people take for granted but were novel experiences for someone who had lived in the bubble of fame since childhood. Bodyguard Bill Whitfield recalls taking Jackson to a public movie theater, a rare occurrence that required elaborate security planning. He was like a kid experiencing something for the first time. He loved being able to sit in a regular theater seat, eat popcorn, and just be part of a normal audience. These simple pleasures that most people don't even think about were special events for him. On another occasion, Whitfield and fellow security guard Javon Beard took Jackson to a public park at night so he could experience the simple joy of pushing his children on a swing set without being recognized or mobbed. Watching him laugh and play with his kids in a regular park, it was like he was making up for the childhood he never had, Whitfield recalls. Jackson's relationship with technology revealed yet another surprising aspect of his private personality. Despite his futuristic stage productions and innovative music videos, he was somewhat old-fashioned when it came to personal technology. According to those close to him, he preferred physical books to e-readers, enjoyed writing letters by hand, and was slow to adopt new gadgets. He had a childlike fascination with gadgets but didn't always use them effectively, recalls one assistant. He would get excited about a new computer or phone but then struggle with the basics of how to use it. There was something endearing about watching this musical genius be completely stumped by a simple text message. This technological hesitancy extended to social media, which was beginning to transform celebrity culture during the last years of Jackson's life. While many celebrities embraced platforms like Twitter and Facebook, Jackson remained wary of the additional exposure they would bring to a life already overexposed. He understood the power of direct communication with fans, explains one marketing consultant who worked briefly with Jackson in 2008, but he was concerned about the loss of privacy and control. He used to say, "I already live in a world without walls. Why would I want to tear down the few that remain?" Jackson's spirituality was another facet of his private life that often surprised those who knew him only through his public persona. Raised as a Jehovah's Witness, he formally separated from the religion in the late 1980s but retained a deep faith that informed many of his personal decisions. Michael was profoundly spiritual, though not in a dogmatic way, recalls Rabbi Shmuley Batich, who maintained a friendship with Jackson for several years and recorded hours of conversations with him. He read widely about different faiths, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, and incorporated elements from various traditions into his personal practice. This spiritual searching led Jackson to explore numerous faiths and philosophies throughout his adult life. He studied with Rabbi Batich, meditated with Deepak Chopra, and developed friendships with Christian ministers, Muslim imams, and various spiritual teachers. He was always seeking deeper meaning, Chopra has said of their friendship. Our conversations rarely touched on music or entertainment. Michael wanted to discuss consciousness, the nature of suffering, the purpose of life. He had the soul of a mystic trapped in the body of the most famous entertainer on earth. This spiritual dimension informed Jackson's approach to his art as well. Many of his songs, particularly in his later career, addressed themes of unity, environmental stewardship, healing, and transcendence. Tracks like Earth Song, Heal the World, and Will You Be There expressed a spiritual vision that went far beyond the typical content of pop music. Those songs weren't just entertainment for Michael, explains Brad Buxer. They were expressions of his deepest beliefs about the world and humanity's potential. He genuinely believed music could change consciousness and heal divisions. These glimpses of normality were precious to Jackson, who spent most of his life navigating a world that treated him as something other than human, either as an idol to be worshipped or, particularly in his later years, as an object of ridicule and suspicion. The toll of this existence was evident to those who knew him well. Many observed a profound duality in Jackson's personality, a split between the confident, almost superhuman performer and the vulnerable, sometimes childlike private individual. On stage, Michael had this incredible presence that filled arenas, says choreographer Travis Payne, who worked with Jackson on the This Is It tour preparations. But off stage, especially as he got older, there was a fragility to him. He seemed to carry the weight of decades of public scrutiny and judgment. You could see it in his posture, in his eyes. This vulnerability was particularly apparent in how Jackson responded to criticism and negative media coverage. Despite his tremendous success, he remained extraordinarily sensitive to public perception. Negative press hurt him deeply, recalls attorney Thomas Mesereau, who successfully defended Jackson during his 2005 trial. He would read these terrible things written about him and take them to heart in a way that was almost childlike in its rawness. He couldn't develop the thick skin that most celebrities eventually acquire. Music producer David Foster, who worked with Jackson on various projects, noted, most artists at his level develop a certain immunity to criticism. Michael never did. A bad review, a nasty comment, these things would devastate him. He cared deeply about being understood and appreciated not just as an entertainer but as a human being. This sensitivity extended to physical pain as well. Following the 1984 Pepsi commercial accident that left him with second-degree burns on his scalp, Jackson began what would become an increasingly complex relationship with pain management and prescription medications. Dr. Neil Ratner, who served as Jackson's personal physician during parts of the 1990s, has spoken about the singer's struggle with chronic pain. Michael had legitimate pain issues stemming from the burn injury and later from stress injuries related to performing. But managing that pain became complicated by his increasing tolerance to medications and the pressures of his career. By the early 2000s, those closest to Jackson noticed concerning changes in his behavior and physical condition. He often appeared underweight, disoriented, or sedated. His speech could be slurred, his movements sluggish. The once dynamic performer sometimes seemed to be fading before their eyes. Karen Fay recalls one particularly alarming incident during the 2005 trial. He came to court one day clearly not well. His balance was off, he was confused. Those of us who knew him were terrified. We tried to intervene, to get him help, but there were always business considerations, tour deadlines, contract obligations that seemed to take precedence over his health. This period marked what many consider the darkest chapter of Jackson's private life. Isolated, surrounded increasingly by advisors more concerned with his earning potential than his well-being, and struggling with dependency issues, the gap between his public and private personas seemed to widen dramatically. Yet even during this difficult time, those who knew him intimately continued to see flashes of the brilliant, gentle soul behind the troubled exterior. His love for his children never wavered. His creative vision, though sometimes clouded by medication or exhaustion, remained remarkable. And his fundamental kindness, a quality mentioned by virtually everyone who knew him personally, continued to shine through. Even when he was at his lowest, Michael would still be concerned about other people, remembers Frank Caschio. He'd ask about your family, remember your birthday, want to know if you were okay. His empathy was extraordinary. This empathy extended far beyond Jackson's inner circle. Throughout his career, he donated millions to charitable causes, often without publicity. He visited sick children in hospitals around the world, spending hours with individual patients away from cameras. The Guinness Book of World Records recognized him as the pop star who supported the most charities. Michael's philanthropy wasn't for show, insists Karen Fay. He genuinely cared about suffering, especially when it involved children. He would be deeply affected by stories of children in pain or in need. It wasn't a PR strategy, it was who he was at his core. This compassion was rooted in Jackson's own experiences of childhood fame, which had robbed him of a normal upbringing and exposed him to adult pressures at a very young age. His creation of Neverland Ranch, the 2,700-acre property featuring amusement park rides, a zoo, and extensive gardens, was widely misinterpreted by the public and media as evidence of eccentricity or arrested development. Those who visited Neverland and observed Jackson there describe a different reality. Rather than a bizarre playground for an adult who refused to grow up, the ranch was primarily designed to bring joy to underprivileged and sick children. Jackson regularly invited groups from children's hospitals and orphanages to spend the day enjoying attractions normally beyond their reach. Watching Michael with those kids at Neverland was revelatory, recalls family friend David Nordahl, an artist who created numerous paintings for Jackson. He wasn't trying to recapture his own childhood, as many people assumed. He was trying to create happiness for children who had been denied it, just as he had been in different ways. There was nothing inappropriate about it, it was beautiful and generous. Security guard Bill Whitfield elaborates, Neverland wasn't built for Michael. It was built for the thousands of underprivileged kids he brought there over the years. I saw buses of children arrive, children with terminal illnesses, children from inner-city programs, children who had never experienced anything like it. And I saw how much joy it brought him to watch them enjoy themselves. This disconnect between public perception and private reality became a defining feature of Jackson's existence, particularly in his later years. As media narratives about him grew increasingly negative and sensationalized, those who knew the real Michael found themselves witnessing a painful distortion of a man they respected and loved. It was like watching character assassination in real time, says Karen Fay. The Michael portrayed in tabloids and gossip shows bore no resemblance to the person I knew for nearly 3 decades. It broke my heart, and I know it broke his. This distortion reached its nadir during Jackson's 2005 trial on charges of child molestation. Though he was acquitted on all counts by a jury who found the accusations lacking in credibility, the process took an enormous toll on his physical and mental health. Attorney Thomas Mesereau, who led Jackson's defense team, observed the private anguish behind the composed public facade. Michael maintained dignity throughout the trial, but privately he was devastated by the allegations. The suggestion that he would harm a child, when his life's work had been about protecting and helping children, wounded him at the deepest level. Following the acquittal, Jackson retreated from public life, spending time abroad in Bahrain, Ireland, and France before eventually returning to the United States. Those who knew him during this period describe a man attempting to heal and reconnect with what had always mattered most to him, his children, his music, and his vision for making a positive impact on the world. By early 2009, as preparations for the This Is It concert series in London got underway, some close to Jackson observed glimmers of the vibrant artist they had known in earlier years. Though still thin and sometimes frail, he appeared engaged with the creative process and excited about returning to the stage. Choreographer Kenny Ortega, who was directing the This Is It tour, recalled Jackson's passion during rehearsals. There were moments when the old magic was fully there, his movements precise, his voice strong, his eyes alive with creative fire. He had so many ideas, so many things he wanted to express through these performances. Backup dancer Nick Bass, who was part of the This Is It production, remembered, in rehearsals, once the music started, he transformed. The frail guy would suddenly become Michael Jackson. It was like witnessing a superhero put on his cape. Then when the music stopped, he would go back to being this soft-spoken, gentle person. The contrast was incredible. But privately, Jackson was struggling. The physical demands of the planned 50-concert schedule concerned many who understood his health challenges. His dependency on prescription medications, particularly those intended to help him sleep, had become increasingly problematic. He was caught in an impossible situation, suggests Dr. Neil Ratner. He needed to rest adequately to perform at the level he demanded of himself, but he couldn't sleep naturally due to anxiety and chronic pain. It was a vicious cycle that ultimately proved fatal. On June 25, 2009, Michael Jackson died from acute propofol and benzodiazepine intoxication after suffering cardiac arrest at his rented mansion in Los Angeles. He was 50 years old. The world mourned the loss of a musical genius, an entertainment icon, a global superstar. But those who knew the man behind the mask mourned something more personal, the loss of a gentle soul who had never quite found the peace and acceptance he sought throughout his extraordinary yet troubled life. In the years since his death, efforts to understand the real Michael Jackson have continued. His children, now adults, have shared glimpses of the devoted father they knew. Former employees and friends have written memoirs and given interviews describing the private man they encountered behind closed doors. Even Jackson's own unreleased music and personal notes have provided windows into aspects of his inner world previously hidden from public view. What emerges from these various sources is a portrait far more nuanced and human than either the superhuman icon or the troubled eccentric portrayed in media narratives during his lifetime. The private Michael Jackson was neither saint nor sinner but something more complex, a profoundly gifted artist shaped by unusual circumstances, struggling to navigate a life unlike any other while maintaining his humanity and integrity. Michael used to tell me that he felt most like himself when he was either performing or alone with his children, remembers bodyguard Bill Whitfield. Everything in between, the fame, the attention, the criticism, the adulation, that was the part he had to endure to have those moments of authenticity. This quest for authenticity in a life defined by artifice and performance represents perhaps the most poignant aspect of Jackson's private existence. Behind the stage makeup, elaborate costumes, and carefully choreographed public appearances was a man searching for connection, understanding, and the simple human dignity of being seen for who he truly was. Karen Fay, who literally helped create the public face of Michael Jackson through her work as his makeup artist for nearly 3 decades, perhaps best summarizes the disparity between image and reality. The world saw what it wanted to see in Michael, a spectacle, a curiosity, a legend, sometimes even a caricature. But those of us who knew him saw something else entirely, a sensitive artist, a loyal friend, a devoted father, a human being with extraordinary gifts and ordinary vulnerabilities. That was the real Michael Jackson. When the spotlights dimmed and the cameras stopped rolling, this was the man who emerged from behind the mask, not the otherworldly king of pop, but something at once more ordinary and more remarkable, a human being navigating an inhuman level of fame while trying to preserve what mattered most, his art, his children, and his humanity. In a 1993 interview with Oprah Winfrey, one of the rare occasions when the public and private Michael seemed to briefly align, Jackson offered perhaps the most revealing insight into how he wished to be remembered. "I would like to be thought of as a person who came and brought light to the world, someone who made children happy, who tried to teach them the meaning of giving of yourself to others, and who wanted to be a good force in the world. By this measure, the one that mattered most to Michael himself, the man behind the mask, succeeded beyond measure. Despite the controversies, the misunderstandings, and the painful distortions of his public image, the private legacy of Michael Jackson endures in the art that continues to inspire millions and in the memories of those fortunate enough to have known the gentle soul behind the legendary name. As his daughter Paris Jackson poignantly observed in her first interview after his death, "He was the best father you could ever imagine. And I just want to say, ever since I was born, Daddy has been the best father you could ever imagine. I just want to say I love him so much." Behind the sequins, beyond the headlines, beneath the masks and makeup, this was the essential truth about Michael Jackson: he was human, extraordinarily talented yet fundamentally vulnerable, capable of both brilliance and folly, driven by dreams yet haunted by demons, adored by millions yet often profoundly alone. When the music stopped and the world looked away, this was the man his children knew, his friends recognized, and his closest associates respected, not the king of pop, but simply Michael, a man who changed music forever while longing for the ordinary human connections that his extraordinary life made so difficult to find.